Okay, this is from a publication, no, this is what, the 19th of September. So, the official assignment was to read chapter 5 in gold, and that is state government codes. You could take an entire semester in law school and still not cover all of it. It's actually way too much for anybody who is not a lawyer. The codes are written to stand up in court, to be unable to be interpreted any other way than the way that they are written. Lawyers write them, and they are incredibly boring to read. An ideal code starts off with about 10 pages of definitions. And that's what they do so that you can't say, well, that doesn't really mean this or that. One of the worst examples of a code is the one that surveyors work under, because there are so few definitions in it. And when it comes to the practice of surveying, there are just things that if it was the intention of the board or of the powers that be that you should not be able to do this, they did a very poor job of explaining it. So practices that are questionable are not illegal. So you end up with this weird standard where the board charges people with violating laws that don't exist, and they are working on revising it. Part of the reason that you got out-of-date codes is that the industry is moving so fast right now. Everything is changing. 20 years ago, using a total station was a neat new idea. 30 years ago, well, in 1983, they were still chaining. People were still chaining, and one of the reasons that people, that surveyors are so resistant to change is because when you do a job of work in a situation where it's going to go to court, you have to be able to explain everything about what it is that you did. And so for a long time, surveyors didn't want to use electronic distance measurement because they couldn't explain it in court. And to be ripped to shreds by the opposing attorney is nothing anybody wants. And, okay, yeah, how would you explain how GPS works?
I have a little diagram. Actually, it was in that book of Stacy Lyle notes that I gave you. Do you still have that?
Yeah, I've got the digital.
I don't know what I did with the dildo.
Anyway, almost anybody who tries to explain exactly how GPS works makes an idiot out of themselves, because it's a very complicated system. The principles are basic, but the actual application is extremely complicated. The codes in surveying, like the occupations code, the natural resources code, are very much out of date as far as the actual physical working out of a survey. For instance, the natural resources code talks about, and this is just one of them, if you have a dispute about a county boundary line, then ideally you get an LSLS or you get the county surveyor, and the both sides show up and they run the traverse. And according to the rules, the only thing that the county surveyor can charge, can be reimbursed for, is the chain carrier, who must be 16 years or older. And since nobody chains anymore, They take a very expansive view of that, but constantly in the regulations it talks about maintaining the accuracy of your chains. Well, who chains? Nobody. So anyway, this is a wonderful little explanation from the Thurgood Marshall School of Law Library at Texas Southern University. And you don't often see all of the codes laid out side by side, but you would be amazed at how many different codes affect surveying in different ways. Ways that you probably wouldn't even be aware of. And I haven't found any references in the alcoholic beverage code, but I haven't looked hard either. Not much in the education code. Corporations and associations, yeah, as far as running a business. Civil practice and remedies. What do you think you might find there?
Which one?
Civil practices and remedies. Innocuous sounding.
I don't know about the remedies. The civil practice may be the way you conduct your survey,
not even the surveying aspect of it.
Okay, then what?
Eminent domain.
Oh.
That's where it lives. And so there is no one place you can go to look up all of the laws that relate to surveying. That's, if you don't pick up anything else from this evening, come away with that. No one place, and it's always changing. It's subject to change every time the legislature is in session. So what Ken Gold did was that he simply took a few issues and pointed you in the direction. Like, okay, this issue is in such and such code, and also in another code. And there's nothing in the codes to prevent them from contradicting each other.
If that was the case and you found, one side of the argument supported in this code and then the other side supported in a different code.
Then where do you think you end up? Court. Yeah, everything in our legal system is based on an issue being solved either by a judge or by a jury of your peers. And it may not be the best system, there may be cheaper ways to do things, but it seems to work. In fact, as far as property law, as far as, say, a person wanting to adversely possess someone else's property, it's been harder, even in the 1920s. It was easier to hang a person than it was to take their land. And I don't mean the state hanging someone, I mean a lynch mob. It was easier, and you were less likely to get charged with it. I honestly don't remember of very many successful prosecutions of lynch mobs. But it was harder than hell to take someone's land away from them. So it's a funny legal system, and it's still under construction. Election code. Well, county surveyor. He's elected. That's about the only one I can think of. Unless you want to hire a surveyor to denote the 200-foot boundary line from the entrance of the polling place. Usually they let people with tape measures do that, the election judge. And, oh, by the way, on election day, an election judge, every polling place has an election judge.
They're on premises?
Yeah, they're on premises. He's usually the head of one or the other of the parties for that precinct. But every precinct has an election judge. And on that day, that judge is as powerful as a district judge in Texas. He has just as much authority to order people ejected, order them arrested. Back in the old days, he could have strapped on a sidearm before it was legal. The ones, okay, well, I probably ought to get that other, okay. You can see Occupations Code, 1071. everything you need to know about how to be a surveyor, and then less. Parks and Wildlife Code, definitely, if you're dealing with state land that, or you're dealing with private land that joins a state park. The Parks and Wildlife Code at one point forced me to not buy a piece of property because it had a golden cheek warbler. I don't know if you remember those.
No, but that sounds like a,
That was during the Ann Richards administration. And basically any place that was a suitable habitat for a golden-cheeked warbler was then protected habitat. And you had to do amazing things. You had to participate in basically a scheme to buy undeveloped land. The state would set aside this land, you'd put money into it, and then you could develop your land. Yeah. It didn't sound fair then, and it doesn't sound fair now. Okay, probate code, how does that affect surveyors?
if someone leaves land to someone.
That basically, a lot of the times when people call in surveyors, it's the heirs. If they're going to sell the land, it has to be surveyed. If you are researching a piece of property, then it helps to know the changes in the probate code. Like, at what point did it become necessary for, say, the surviving spouse to probate the will of the dead one? I don't know the answer. I forgot to look that one up, and I'm fresh out of lawyers, but it hasn't always been the case that wills have had to have been probated for every single person who died.
Right.
And it makes it hard to look up the chain of title if you have these gaps in it. And when I bought, in fact, this is the second time I bought a place where we've had to get a certificate of heirship, saying that, you know, there is one heir and no other. What was funny, and when I bought the place in Taylor, I had to get a certificate of heirship from a man named Zeppelin.
That's funny.
And it's like, okay, I'll go along with that joke. Property code, definitely. Not so much the tax code. Transportation code, yeah. Guess who falls under transportation code? Well, sort of.
Well, what?
Railroad Commission.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
that's dumb.
Guess who covers all of the oil and gas business in Texas? Yeah. Utilities code. Easements everywhere. You know, every time they want to run a power line or a gas line, petroleum pipeline, that follows the utilities code and the water code. And natural resources code. Really, it covers more in surveying than you would imagine. So, you can't read and understand all 26 codes in Texas. What you should do is get familiar with the most basic of them, and that's going to be your natural resources code. Definitely your occupations code, because that's what is covered. 1071 is surveying.
Okay.
And we're 1071. What's 0 through 1070?
Everything else.
Well, no, because we're S and we're at 1071, so it's got to go like to 2500 at least. Anyway, where a government code? I don't see that. I see the government code, but I don't see local. Local government code, there it is.
Oh.
Yeah, government code and local government code. Extraterritorial jurisdiction. Now, I know you know what that is. That's basically where municipal institutions have control over development inside of their boundaries and then outside.
What was it called?
Extraterritorial jurisdictions. Crank up that, what little bit of a PowerPoint I had. There it is. Well, anytime today. It's thinking about it. Okay. Think of the codes as the skeleton, and then the court decisions as the muscle. Because once a code is written, it's probably going to be challenged. As far as a code, like a code written that governs a municipality, rather than go to court, like on the local government code, when a city or a county has a question about how the law should be interpreted or applied, where do they go? Who's the big lawyer in the state?
Attorney General.
Yeah. And that basically that's what he does, is his job is to interpret the law for the state of Texas. And that's, you know, the state government, county government, city government. So they get to go and ask him questions. You, as a private individual, can't go to the Attorney General's office and say, how does this affect me personally?
That depends on what it's about.
That's not his job, and he won't give you an answer.
Well, no, maybe not him personally, but the office. If you have dealings with them already and they have you on file for something.
Sometimes, favors get done. There's nothing wrong with that.
No, I don't mean like that. I'm talking about, I've had to call the Attorney General's office before talking about child support stuff with my parents, and so they talked to me. Well, they didn't tell me much. They said, oh, yeah, we see your name.
Yeah.
So no, you're right. They don't.
We're the government. That's not our job. So basically, with the codes, with the court cases, you've got a functioning system of common law. And the common law can be, the individual being addressed by the state and then challenging it. Or it can be individual against individual. The most, biggest number of court cases are probably going to be about adverse possession and junior senior rights. Who owns what, when, where. And this was an attempt to make some sense out of it, and it's like, this is going to take a lot longer than I have before this class. But the codes are written, basically most legislators are lawyers, or they should be. We've got more than our fair share of doofuses. And they're the ones who write the bad laws. When a code is properly written or amended, it should be done in a way that doesn't invite litigation. It's supposed to prevent litigation. It's supposed to be clear enough so that anybody can understand what they're supposed to do. go read the codes, and you will see that they have failed utterly. You actually need a lawyer to interpret some of them. So, I mean, some, like the natural resource, or excuse me, I think it's local government, it's either natural resources code or local government code. On-site sewage facilities, septic tanks. They made those easy to read. They made them easy to follow. And, you know, like if you do have a well, you know, an on-site water source, then you need, I believe it's 1 acre. If you don't have, and this is, you know, like not in a city, not even in extraterritorial jurisdiction. And then if you don't have, like if you've got water service, water district, then it can be a half an acre to have a septic tank. That was a change back in about 2005 or so. And I may be wrong, it may be a half an acre without half an acre without a well. But essentially what it did was that it prevented these tiny, tiny lots from having septic tanks. Because there's only so much you can ask a poor little septic tank and drain field to do. Okay, so they are written by lawyers, and they are not written to be easily understood, they're written to stand up in court. Okay, revising, anytime the legislature is sitting. And there have been revisions to the surveyors' regs, not many. And anybody, you can go to the site, you know, the texas.gov, and you can see the Texas Constitution, you know, the big lumbering creature that it is, and you can see all of the codes. But that doesn't help you interpret the codes. It doesn't tell you that, oh yeah, in this other code, that's modified, you know, so you have to take into account both of them. That's why you pretty much have to go on a systematic, what is the subject matter, and then go research it by subject, because you'll find it in about 2 or 3 different codes sometimes. The best source of info, well, actually, available for inspection for free. Available pretty much for free, TSPS. You should be a member. Anybody here a member? You can be an associate, you can be a student member for about $25 a year and get the magazine. It's well worth it, because the court updates, the court case updates, the articles are interesting and they apply to Texas. And I should say the third best way is consult an attorney. However, you can consult attorneys for free on the internet who have little articles on the different subjects. Like you type in adverse possession, and yeah, you see a lot of stuff on adverse possession, because if you're going into a court case on adverse possession, you better have a lawyer. And okay, the venue, this is later on in the book, but you might as well get to know that now. The venue for title issues in Texas is?
For title issues?
Yeah, what court do you go to for a title issue?
District court.
District court, yeah. How many different courts are there in any county? You've got district court.
Okay.
Most counties that are like Ector County and Midland, Travis, Williamson, any place with large cities is going to have their own. They'll probably have 2 district courts, or you know, full and alternate, and then they're going to have probate court usually, and that's in addition to like the justice of the peace court. Justice of the peace courts aren't used that much anymore. But they used to be very powerful places. A lot of very important issues got solved between people in Justice of the Peace Court. And the job of the Justice of the Peace was to maintain order. He didn't go around arresting people, but if you had two people with a boundary dispute, not a title dispute, but a boundary dispute, like, well, you built your fence here and it's not, and all that. That was where they took boundary issues. And in the early days of the Republic, that may be the only court you had access to. So, anyway, there's the list. I hope you like small print. So all 26 of them. And there's stuff hidden in those codes that you would never ever think of. To look, why would it be there? The biggies. Civil practice and remedies. And this is not in order of importance, it's mostly alphabetical. So you'll have a copy of the PowerPoint. But civil practices and remedies, the ways, that's essentially the ways that the government is going to deal with issues like eminent domain. The government code, yeah, it does. It affects surveyors. Local government codes definitely affects surveyors. Natural resources code all over the place. I found out once that I was subject to a Class C misdemeanor. We were working on a not water reclamation, sewage plant. And it was rock. This is back over in Georgetown on the rocky side, the limestone. And I don't know what, it's not just limestone, this stuff was chert. You could have made arrowheads out of it. But anyway, caves everywhere. And so they had quarried out this huge hole for a water reclamation tank. And it was like 30 feet wide. There at the bottom was a cave, small cave. And what they were going to do is that, after they got the walls poured, they were going to fill in the rest with rubble and concrete. So I went in with my little surveyor's hammer and I knocked out a few stalagmites, tights, and then flowstone, which is where the water is, like dripping down, and it looks kind of like cake batter. And I gave those as a present to my nephew, or not nephew, godson. And then I was reading the code and said, oh my God. So, if...
Now we have you on tape.
I confess, but I didn't confess when, and presumably there is a statute of limitations, but essentially things that you wouldn't consider to be at all illegal are, misdemeanors or felonies. As your former boss could probably tell you. So, don't tick off the feds. Okay, the occupations code, we've already discussed that. That covers surveying in the state. And, okay, what's the difference between the occupations code and the TSPS manual of practice? And this is a big distinction. After you get through, you can start thinking about it and maybe answering.
Okay.
Because what's the difference between the TSPS manual of practice and the occupations code of the state of Texas concerning surveying?
Without reading the occupations code, I don't know.
Well, the TSPS manual of practice is based on the surveyor's code. It tends to go further in terms of describing the way certain things should be done. What happens if you violate the occupations code?
Guess you're subject to penalties by the
What sort
state.
of penalties?
I don't know, fines, jail time.
Yeah.
Like,
It can
on
be civil,
severity of
civil
something.
or criminal.
Okay.
And civil, they can fine you. Criminal, they can jail you. That's the occupations code.
Okay.
TSPS manual of practice. What happens if you violate that?
They can.
They can kick you out,
Right.
and that's it. Because the difference is that the occupations code and any laws of the state have teeth.
Right. Because it's state.
It's a law.
This
It's
is
not
just-
it's not a recommendation.
Okay.
And the board who administers the state law, TBPLS, administers the occupations code, and they have broad latitude to interpret those laws. Sometimes a little too broad, but they can fine you. They can jerk your license. They could bind you over if what you had been doing had defrauded people. They could bind you over to, arrest. They don't have the authority to arrest you, but gee, they do. They know a lot of people who do, and they can charge you with crimes.
Like for what?
Hmm?
For example?
Okay, like practicing without a license is one. They're beginning to take that very seriously.
Okay, how do you practice without a license?
Well, okay, if you're crew chief, right? Someone comes up and says, could you settle a boundary dispute here? Can you find our pins?
Okay, can you find the pins or could you settle the
Settle the
dispute?
dispute.
Which
Well, yeah, that's the question.
If they just say to you, can you
Can-
find the pins, and they are intending for the outcome of that
Yeah.
to settle the dispute, but they don't say that to you, are you still,
Yeah, practicing.
Are
without a
you
license.
are you practicing? What if you don't find the pin? It's missing, and you set a new one based on field information.
no, that's probably not a good idea.
That's practicing surveying without a license.
Okay.
But
But
anybody
say
can
you
pull
just-
a tape measure between 2 points and set up.
And set a pin? No, you can't set a pin.
Well, you could.
You
It
could.
couldn't, it doesn't mean it's legal
It doesn't
or
mean
right
it's, well,
or
I mean,
anything else, but
If
it's
you're,
possible.
if you're one of the two property owners, then if you're in agreement with the other,
Right.
you can sort of do that. As a third party, can you set a pin without a license?
Not without a
No.
license.
Why come a construction crew can?
They're not supposed to. But, if they've knocked it out, they're not supposed to put it back. But there's no law, well, there's no law with a lot of teeth against it. I'll put it that way. Even if you knock out a monument, a federal monument, you're talking about maybe a $250 fine.
I mean, how can they get you for practicing without a license?
They pretty much have to entrap you. Someone would have to complain, which there are surveyors who will complain. If you are taking business away from them. Like, used to be, 10, 20 years ago, it used to be fairly common for the crew on the weekends to make a little bit of money off the regular clientele by, say, locating, setting points for a fence line and all that. Where they were using their boss's equipment and not telling the boss about it.
Is that surveying without a license or is this just setting up?
Well, that's basically, unethical behavior between yourself and the boss. There are companies coming in to this area now, performing surveying services without a registered surveyor.
Oh, there's tons of them right now.
Yeah, and that's illegal. And they are subject to penalty. They are subject to having their doors locked.
how do they get away with it then?
Because no one reports them.
Now, does the survey have to be there at all times, or just there to sign the platform review?
Oh, now you're asking questions. That's what is now under discussion at the board and on the state level. What constitutes direct control? And the law itself is ambiguous. So,
I just don't understand what surveying without a license
surveying without a
is.
license, suppose a surveyor at your old company died 20 years ago, and you found his seal.
Oh, I can understand that.
Yeah, and you started surveying and sealing documents.
Right.
Well,
That's
it's just dumb.
that. Well, yeah, it's dumb, but there's, the jails are full of dumb people.
Yeah.
But soliciting business that you're, okay, if you do not have an RPLS attached to that business, the question now is, what is apt?
Right.
Because with these things, these, do you really need to be in the office? Can you be at a third location? Can you work from home? What what determines direct control of a field crew? And if you're in telephone communication with them, do you actually have to be in the county to go out and actually see the site? Does the RPLS have to inspect every single property that he seals a document about? And that's never been required if he has a field crew. See, we're at that point now where the question is, how many field crews can a surveyor actually control? And the more skilled they are, the more experienced they are, the more you can control under one surveyor.
Right, because you know that they're going to
to
perform
do
the
their
things
job.
that you would want them to do
Yeah.
out in the field, so you
Mhm.
if you trust them to do that.
Yeah.
then-
And it's that whole issue of the trust. And the occupations code is very lenient in the way it describes control. It almost doesn't. It just says he has to be in direct control over. So if, here's my favorite example. What if Stan or any surveyor hires a Spanish-speaking only crew chief and a Spanish-speaking only crew?
Well, it's not going to be easy for him to communicate unless he knows Spanish fluently, but
What if he has an interpreter?
I wouldn't say that'd be.
Is that direct control?
No.
Why not? What if the person doing the interpreting is another crew chief?
Yes, maybe,
What-
but
yeah.
how do you ensure that he's telling them exactly what you intend
It's hard
for
enough.
him
It's hard enough to
to
explain
say
things in English
Right.
sometimes.
without
basically-
translating?
Yeah, and that's an issue that is, as we speak, under control. The board is still debating it. And I got in on that case very early on. And, so, oh Lord, there's nothing worse than an interesting legal case if you're on the inside of it. Luckily, I was not, I'm there because of this job.
Well, being on the inside of any legal case, interesting or otherwise,
Yeah.
it's not fun.
But I was asked to testify because I'm so far out and away from where all this stuff is going on, and I didn't have a dog in the fight. And the question is just how much can you use those things, and still is there any reason that you can't post instructions, written instructions? Because I've followed many times whatever the surveyor wrote down. Well, who says he can't write it down
Right.
in an
Send
email?
you an email.
Or a discussion board, a company
Right.
discussion board. It's not in the law.
Well, sure, 'cause never
So-
a necessity to decide before.
Yeah, and, well, we never had anything to decide like that before. Most of the surveyors around predate computers, or at least
But-
personal computers.
It still would be, I mean, it couldn't have been unheard of before computers to have, I mean, like you said, just written down. So
Mhm.
say the first page in the field book, this job, these are the instructions for your
Mhm.
job. I mean, it is essentially the same, but they haven't made a decision.
They're working on it, because it's a complicated issue. Because the
'Cause
surveyor
it
was,
can't be a blanket thing. I mean, it would have to be subject to interpretation
Yeah.
case by case.
but that's not how you write a code.
Well,
You write
I
a
know,
code
but I
to
mean-
apply to everything, and then you put exceptions in. Yeah. That's why writing code, writing law is really hard. You know, to write a fair law. And I'll let you know if I ever see one.
I was going to say, where are those?
Somewhere else. Okay, I missed.
You skipped control. Ooh,
There.
You can't read that red on that brown and wall.
Well, I can't change the color
That's
either. It
crazy.
won't let me. Occupations Code, Section 1071. That's the pay dirt for the surveyor, because that defines your duties, your responsibilities, etc. It tells you what, the sections of that code tell you how many hours of what courses you have to have to apply to be an SIT, what you have to do to become an RPLS, what you have to do to become an LSLS, etc.
So,
And how they
the things that are
recognize
in the act and the rules.
that
some
the
are
act and the
hidden.
rules, that's the code.
Oh, okay.
The act is 1071
Oh, okay.
Occupations Code.
Gotcha. Well, then, I have that at my house.
Okay. And what you can't read, the
Hold
Natural
on.
Resources Code.
General land.
General, everything about the General Land Office.
Huh.
Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, School Land Board. Remember School Lands of Texas?
Yes.
Yeah. Boards for lease of state-owned lands. In other words, school lands also. And then Natural Resources Code. On-site wastewater treatment research. Septic, sewage. Part 10, Texas Water Development Board. That's a board that's really going to become more and more powerful in the next 50 years. They're gonna have to change the law at some point. Because at this time, whatever, in terms of groundwater, subsurface water, whatever you can capture is yours. And that's not fair. That means T. Boone Pickens can move in next door to you, or a mile away, and suck your aquifer dry. So people are gradually warming to the idea of it not being fair. Coastal Coordination Council. What the hell is
Coastal
that
what?
about? Coastal Coordination Council.
I don't know what is that.
Okay, what happens when a hurricane hits and wipes out the beach?
A big mess.
Yeah, big mess. And what happens to the property
Property
that
lines
used
probably should.
that used to be not beachfront property?
Avulsion.
Yeah. And avulsion in this case on the coast of Texas is the only time that avulsive action changes property lines.
Huh.
Because in most, like on riparian rivers, avulsion does not change property lines. Avulsion on the coastline does. And that
Why
got
not on
taken
the
that
river?
got taken to court.
Oh.
Federal court instead of the state court, as should have been the jurisdiction.
Right.
And I forget what they're calling that case, but it's making it got turned back from federal court to state court, where it's going to basically bleed the woman dry who lost. Well, she had constructive notice that should the shoreline change, her property could become state land, and she chose to buy anyway. So,
Why would they do that? I mean,
Why would they take her
Yeah.
land, or?
Yeah.
Because it's now, the shoreline is now under her house. It's on stilts.
Okay.
You know, like, literally the tide washes under her house.
So it's kind of like the sidewalk and then that little space in between. You don't actually own it, but you have to maintain it. So that edge of her property, or what is state property now because the property changed.
Well, it's the main issue in the Natural Resources Code on here is and has always been the public right to the beach, public access to the beach.
Right, but there's private beaches all over. I mean, people own up to the water, don't they?
No, not in Texas.
No.
In California, you can. Different laws. In Texas, if it's a beach, you can walk on it. Now, the Property Owners Association might make it impossible for you to get there. Like if there is a subdivision that
That's
stretches
what I was
for
going to say.
miles.
So what happens like that? Like if you go to the edge of the National Seashore right there, and like Mustang
National
Island State-
Seashore, it's not.
Yeah, there's a piece that's in Texas that is.
National
There's a
Seashore.
national park.
Well, it can be a national
Well,
park.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But that's
The
still
feds
public
had to
land.
buy it, or it had to be given to the feds.
Right, but it's still public
it's state
access.
land, yeah.
Right. Okay. So, but then, right when you access the beach
Mhm.
from there, back the other way, it's blocked off, and you can't get to it. And there's houses and stuff up here. So,
That's
how
okay.
could that be?
Well, it might be blocked off for vehicular traffic,
Okay.
but
You
foot
still
traffic.
should be able to walk.
Foot
over
traffic, yeah. And, you know, the, part of the issue is, if you have a long, you know, a subdivision that stretches for miles, they might make it impossible to access the beach except at the ends.
there. Right.
But you have the right to walk on the beach.
They can't keep you from.
They can't forcibly eject you. Now, they can make it difficult for you. And usually, you know, vehicular traffic, if you can get the car on the beach, you can drive. But have you ever gotten a car stuck?
No, I've seen it. Though.
And it's really stupid and embarrassing if you're trying to make a legal point and then, you know, your car gets hit by the tide. Okay, we are at local government code. Jurisdiction, who's got it? Extraterritorial jurisdiction. What is it? There it is. Yeah, right. And that was as big as I could make it. I had to. What it is that every city, town, municipal entity has the right to dictate things like electrical power, water, sewage, and all that inside their own jurisdiction and for X amount of space beyond that.
So, say every time that they extend the boundaries of the city limits,
Then
does
the
that keep going
extraterritorial,
with
yeah, it
that?
does.
They don't have to amend that wording of it to say, okay, now that it's this many acres inside city limits, now it's still the 700 feet outside or whatever.
It goes, okay. And it's based on the size of the town, city, etc.
So, but like acreage or population?
Not acreage, and it's the population of the
footage.
parent city, parent thing.
Right.
And
But
it's
so within
it's
the city
so
limits.
far.
Okay.
It's like a linear distance around.
Okay.
So basically, in the case of a municipality with fewer than 5,000, half a mile.
Oh, okay, I see.
Okay, within 1 mile, if
5
they
to
are 5,
25.
and it's actually 4,999 to ignore that. Okay, because I had someone make an issue with that. It's like, go find something
Within that
useful.
one, whatever, yeah.
To $24.99. Yeah, I did. I got
5
you.
to 25, 25 to 50.
And then 2 miles,
Oh,
25,000. And that's 5 miles to 10 miles.
Yeah.
And then 3.5 miles of those boundaries in the case of municipality with 5,000 or 50,000 to 100,000, or within 5 miles of those boundaries in the case of municipality with 100,000 or more.
So Midland would be 5 miles outside
Yeah.
the city.
So by the time you get Midland and Odessa, there's
There-
damn little in between.
Right.
So that's what that's about, and that definitely affects the way, like if you're doing an acreage survey, it affects the minimum precision that has to be. Okay, Texas Property Code covers almost all aspects of property. So probate court or probate code, everything to do with death and dying. Okay, what's the difference between real and personal property? Between realty and personalty?
Personal property would be your car, your possessions, stuff like that.
Right.
Real is the actual
Okay,
land.
basically movable or immovable.
Right.
So, and it's funny because cars have titles and property has titles, but they're not quite the same thing. We already talked about eminent domain, and that's covered in the local government, I think, code. And then adverse possession is in all of it. One of the places is in procedure remedies, or is it
You said civil practices.
civil practices and remedies? Yeah, civil practices and remedies. There are so many codes, it's very hard to keep them all straight. And the same thing can be in more than one code. So be forewarned. Don't intend to hold you to this, but this is how you actually do quotations. Legal quotations. Useful to know.
Are you gonna, is that in
That,
our,
y'all send it to you
okay,
along with this when it actually uploads.
okay.
But those, well, how much of chapter 5 did you actually look at?
Not that much really.
Okay. Okay, we've got, well, there was something that had jumped out at me. Okay, oh, even in this extraterritorial jurisdiction, it has, what happens if it's in between, if it gets covered by
Yeah, so
two?
what happened?
Basically, bigger one wins, as in most of life. A lot, Gold talks a lot about requirements for plats. That's a good idea,
Yeah.
because it's possible to accidentally miss something. And then you're looking at $1,500 from the board.
$1,500 for what kind of infraction?
Gee, I'll let you look that up.
Dang it. Is it in here or will I
Yeah,
need?
no, actually, it's in your TSPS manual, and it's in the, okay, go to the board website. Look for the act and the rules, and you'll have to do that some other time because
'Cause
your kid is probably standing by the side of the road shivering.
probably.
So anyway, yeah, that's both of your assignments.
Okay.
That's all three of you. Go to the TBPOS website, access the act and the rules, and go to what is called the penalty matrix. And that's one of the things we're going to go through this semester so that I can put the fear of God into you.
I have the act in a little notebook all by itself.
No.
And you know what? I'm pretty sure it's actually marked that page
No,
right there.
and it should be. Because he was a very good surveyor. He taught when I first got here, he taught the computer-aided mapping class. But he fell foul of the board because of a simple error that he made on a surveyor, and he was covering for the surveyor in charge, so he ended up getting penalized. So, and it was on something that was very simple. Omitting things like the north arrow from a plat, or the scale, subject to fine.
What if you say no scale? That's still a scale, right?
It has to be to a scale.
What if there's just a portion that is not to a scale?
What part of, what do you mean?
Like a little inset where something's a tiny little detail that someone asks to be
No, that's
blown up to seen, and you have the whole section.
an interesting question.
As-
I don't know the answer to that. I know that the regular, most of the drawing must be to scale.
Right.
That's a great question. I'll find out the answer.
I would like to know.
Okay,
Thanks.
because it should have to have its own scale.
Normally it does, but
Yeah.
you see it every once in a while where
Yeah.
something's blown up to where it's awkward to fit it into something.
It should have its own scale
so
or be
tiny.
readily identifiable.
Right.
Like something that's marked as 10 feet.
Right. If you have something on there, okay, well, here to here is 10 feet and here to here is
Yeah.
25 feet,
Mhm.
and you
That
can't
would
base
qualify
your
as a
scale
scale.
to find other things on that, then
Okay.